computer. Okay, so you can see my screen, right? The Cloud Practitioner screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so actually I'm going to jump all the way to the end here. Whoops, didn't mean to go that far to the end, but it's close enough. So these are the resources that are going to, I think if you read everything on here and got to the point where you've committed half or a little bit more to memory, you probably would have a pretty decent shot of passing the test without much more. So
you said it was $100 to try.
$100 to take it. So my goal, I guess, would be that I'm going to try to take the test the first week of February. So November. I don't know where I got February from. First week in November. So if you wait till after I take it, I can tell you how hard it is and what you need to know. So that would be my suggestion. So I think the stuff we'll cover between now, which is in like another 4 weeks. We'll cover this week, next week. So whatever it is, 4 weeks. I'm going to try to hit all the main topic areas. I'm starting to read some of this stuff. I'm trying to practice it. I make myself note cards and some stuff, but I'll know a lot more after I take it. Because I don't want to say go take it and then find out that we didn't cover enough stuff. I mean, that's not fair to you guys. So
you're going through the essentials training, the 11 modules. Are you going through the 11 modules of the essentials training?
So I did the essentials. I already got that passed. I did watch all of those about a year ago. I might rewatch it if I have time for those 6 hours. I think I have a pretty good understanding. The one thing that I probably have that maybe you don't have is I do have about a year of using it for various class solutions, not like in there every day. I probably spent maybe a total of 40 hours over the course of the last 2 years in that environment. So playing around with it is definitely going to be helpful just to get in there and kind of do some stuff. But anyway, so I am motivated to take this, and I don't think we have to. I mean, we got to definitely read, and we're going to cover this stuff in class, but I don't think it's as hard as we're probably making it out to be. So anyway, so let's kind of quickly get through this first part here, and then we'll talk about the topic for tonight. So obviously, this is the one we're working on. My goal is I want to get certified all the way up to this level so I can teach this line right here and over here in data analytics. So once I get certified for these, I can teach these for free also. So that'll be good news for you guys down the road. My guess is sometime next year, I'll be able to teach you those pieces as a certified trainer for free. So, which is good, I think. So these are the 4 topic areas. And we've been kind of focusing a little bit on this one, but this week, the first week we covered some of this concept. So that's in that first PowerPoint deck. Last week we covered some of this stuff. We're going to cover a little bit more of this tonight. And then next week we're going to do security and compliance. And the week after that, technology, probably 2 weeks of technology. And that'll put us towards the end of October. And then the last week, I'm just going to summarize all this. That's kind of the plan for the next couple of weeks. Okay, so these are things we've already talked about. We talked about, these are the keywords. So you need to understand what availability means from a cloud perspective. Basically, it means it has more machines, more access, more touch points than you would have if you ran your own computer, your own system, your own data center. It makes the things more available. Also, it does metered costs and flexible options, where if I buy a piece of hardware, that piece of hardware becomes mine. I own it. I paid for the full price of it, even if I'm only going to use it for an hour a day. Metered cost says, okay, I need a computer for an hour a day. I'm only going to pay for that. I'm not going to pay for anything else. And when I don't need it, I'm not paying for it. So that's another benefit of the cloud. Cloud services, they will manage some of the things which we're going to talk about tonight. They will manage some of that infrastructure. They will manage the hardware, and you're going to manage the software that goes on top of it. They're going to manage the network connection. You're going to manage the security that comes with it. They're going to manage the physical building it goes into, and you're going to manage the virtual settings you're going to create for your uses. So that's the infrastructure piece, which we're going to dig a little bit more in today. Serverless, if you don't need to pay for it, if you don't need it, you're not going to pay for it. As needs go up, it's going to allow us to add processing power or add servers to allow us to meet the increased demand. And when the demand's not there, it will automatically retract down to the area that will allow us to support the normal activity. So just getting this, if you can commit this part to memory, you probably have 6 questions out of your, I think it's 100 questions or 70 questions. You have 6 out of your 70 answers. So, and there's gonna be multiple versions of this stuff. So if you understand these concepts here, you probably have half of your questions that you need answered, with some nuances that come along with it. These are the main applications. So if you're going to play around, if you're going to go in and use your free AWS, I would encourage you to at least play with these pieces of it or understand what they do. There will probably be a question on half of these that show up on the test. So if there is 6, 7, 14 here, you probably will have 7 questions on that. So between knowing, whoops, going the wrong way here. Between knowing this stuff and understanding the concepts of these, I would say you definitely have half of the questions covered, which is good news, right? I mean, but it's not going to pass. You still need a 70% to pass. We've still got to get another 20 questions. And those 20 questions can come from a boatload of different areas. So, okay, so let's talk about the infrastructure that we're that sets up these environments that we can use. And when I buy a physical piece of hardware, think of a laptop that you're using right now or a desktop computer. I have a piece of hardware. That hardware has CPU, it has RAM that's on there. And no matter what application you run, you probably are not using all the CPU or the RAM or the hard space, the disk space that comes with it. So that resource can be shared. I can share the CPU and say, okay, this user can use 40%, and this user can use 20%, and this user can use 10%. Or I can say everyone's going to use 10%, and we're only going to have 5 users, so that's 50%. As user 1 needs more, it'll grab more CPU, but it will not impact the other people's CPU because they're set at 10. Now, if everyone needs more CPU, that's where it becomes a little bit of a problem. AWS manages that so you don't run into that conflict. Same thing with RAMs. A lot of computers now have, gigabytes and gigabytes of RAM available to them, but you don't need it because a lot of stuff you're loading into RAM is not going to take those gigabytes of space. You might only use a couple megabytes here or a couple megabytes there. So we can share their resources. That's cloud. Cloud allows you to share physical hardware, space, processing, and power across multiple users. And they do that by creating virtual machines, which is a subset of these physical machines. So if you have your laptop in front of it, you can actually download things called VMware, which is virtualware. You can download the Apple One box, virtual box. You can download, I can't think of all the different tools that have it. But what it is you create a physical partition on that hardware, and it's almost like you have another computer. So on your laptop, if I installed 4 virtual boxes, 4 VMs, and each one had its own operating system, I could log into that virtual machine and run it like its own computer. And it wouldn't have necessarily access to anything outside that virtual environment. So Amazon buys these powerful, I won't even call them desktop computers, they're called servers, and then they partition them off into these virtual machines. So when I spin up an EC2 instance and I say I want to create a virtual Linux one like we did 2 weeks ago, it says, okay, I have this piece of hardware sitting in this area and it's only being used at 10% capacity. So I'm going to let you spin up your EC2 there. You as the user don't necessarily know which server you're on. You just know that it's going to create that virtual environment for you. And how do you access that? Endpoints. You need to understand the endpoint from a cloud perspective. Endpoints are like your address to connect to anything on the cloud. And you see the one sitting here. So this would be an EC2 instance running in the US West region in availability zone 1A, and everything's going to have the Amazon AWS.com end to it. So if you read this endpoint across, the first thing before the first dot is what type of instance. The second one is where that one is located. And then the third part is the Amazon AWS.com, which everyone will have there. So learning how to read this endpoint could be one of the questions that pop up on the test. They would say, in this case, what type of instance is this created? And you would say this is an EC2, which is an elastic container. If it says what region's this in, you would say US West. And if it asks you what availability zone, which we're going to talk about tonight, you would say A1. So that could pop up as a question. In addition to those endpoints, you can make subnets, which are IP addresses with different amounts of ranges in it. I'm not going to get into detail on that because I don't see a lot of questions that pop up. In fact, you might not even get any on it, but just know that you might need to understand the subnet process. And subnets are IP addresses broken into various subsections. So this is a 192.168, and it starts at 00 for your IP addresses and goes all the way up to 255. If you've never looked at an IP address, oops. Oh, that's calling me. If you never got to the IP address there, just know almost every internet address every domain name that you go to, like an eBay or Amazon.com, has an IP address that becomes its like house address. So I wouldn't say I want to go to Rob's house. I would say I want to go to 7838 East Spanish Oaks, which becomes the IP address. So IP address is like almost like your physical address, and Rob's house becomes like your DNS. It's the more common way that you would access it. And each of these dots from 0 to 255 could be another subset or another house in that neighborhood. By creating this environment, we're trying to avoid a single point of failure. So we're meeting that cloud idea of availability. We're making sure our sites are always up and running. So by making these virtual environments, and I run them across multiple systems, I try to get rid of that single point. If something goes wrong, Amazon, as part of their infrastructure, will make sure the CPU, the RAM, the hardware is up and running. It also allows that auto scaling because I can spin up other virtual machines as quickly as I want. I mean, these probably take, maybe a couple seconds to spin up a fully operating system. And if you have shared data, it's all happens pretty quick behind the scenes. And we have load balancing, which is vertical distribution, which means I have a server next to a server, next to a server, next to a server. Or from a cloud perspective, I have a virtual next to another virtual, next to another virtual. And those virtuals are across different hardware. So if one of the hardware machines goes down, the other ones can take over. So you're back to that available. You're not having your users try to get to your site and have it unavailable. All of this is about availability, and the ability to create those virtuals allows us to do scalable and elasticity. I can spin up as many of these systems as I want, these virtual systems, and I can bring them back down. I'm paying for the virtual server. I'm not paying for the hardware that I'm not using. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next one. So we have a couple different things here. We have a global footprint and we have global services. So global footprint is your region. So we have a region in East United States. We have two in the Western United States. I don't know if we have one in the Central United States. We have them in South America, Asia, Middle East, Europe. We have them all over the place. So that's the global footprint. But some of them also are global services, which means I don't have to install it wherever I want across the globe. I can run it one place and it will propagate across the globe for me. So when I talk global footprint, let's say I want to create an EC2 instance in US West. I would create that there. Now, anybody who's trying to access it from Europe has to go from Europe all the way to the US West region to access that information and then go all the way back to Europe. If I was trying to access it from, let's say South America would have to connect to US West and then go back down to South America. if I wanted to expand my global footprint, I would create copies, one in Europe, one in South America, one in the US, one in Asia, to reduce that latency of how to connect. So I could create a global footprint by using the global footprint within AWS, because they have servers everywhere, everywhere out there. A global service, on the other hand, says if I create a service in US West, it actually will make copies for me all across the globe so that I have access to it. So footprint is the physical building where I'm going to install it, and I create one footprint per instance that I want. Global services, I create the instance and AWS takes care of the distribution for it. You'll see how that differs as we go through some of the other tools here. You'll start seeing some of this stuff like CloudFront and S3. These three are global services. The identity and access management, even if I create it in US West, will propagate across the globe. If I try to store something in an S3 bucket, it will propagate across the globe. It's not tied to a specific region. Whereas like something like an EC2, my relational databases, those are going to be specific to where I install them, and I have to pick how big a global footprint I want for those. The regional layout, where I talked about, like we have them in Europe and in US, and we have 3 or 4 different regions in the US, and we have probably 3 or 4 regions in like Asia or something like that. Those regional layouts decreases the amount of time you need to access it. So just like I said earlier, if I'm in Europe and I need to go to US West, it might take an extra 500 milliseconds to get to the US West, another extra 500 milliseconds to get back, which is not a big deal until you realize I might have to make multiple connections to build up that web page. Let's say I'm trying to build up a web page. Every picture has that 500 millisecond delay. Every style sheet is going to have that delay. Every time I request a JavaScript API call, I'm going to have that delay. So if I have most of my customers in Europe, the best thing would be for me to install my application in a regional server center or data center in Europe rather than the US. If I have people across the globe, I might want to create a couple different regions and install the same thing so that I don't have latency, because the internet's smart enough to go to the one that's closest with the smallest amount of latency, which is good news for us. We don't actually have to figure that out. The other thing it can help with, and this actually popped up on a couple of practice tests I was looking at, is that this regional layout, there are some countries that say I cannot store data collected from German users and store anywhere outside of Germany. Excuse me. So these regional layouts also help you meet regulation requirements of where data can be stored or how it's accessed or where it's accessed from.
That makes sense.
Yep. Isolation of service for improved security. It's possible I want my data being stored on a database in US East. I want my files stored in US West, and I want to run my application out of US Central. If someone happens to break into my system on US Central, it's segregated from the other ones, so I don't necessarily have to worry about security access if they get into the server, getting access to everything within my environment. Excuse me, a little cough going on there. So as you segment your virtual machines, you actually can build security to say what can talk to what and how they should talk to each other. So if I build up a virtual machine, maybe a Linux one for my databases and a Windows one for my web server, and a I don't know, something else for another one of my servers, I can also have a different flavor of my pieces, and I can have different security set up for each of them. Okay, so we started talking about these regions. We talked about regional layouts across the US. So each region has at least 2 availability zones. So if I'm talking US West, which happens to be in Oregon, if they might have 2 or 3 data centers scattered across Oregon, Washington, Northern California, Idaho, Montana, or something like that. Now that is going to help me have redundancies. So let's say, I don't think tornadoes actually happen in Oregon. Let's say a tornado hit the data center in Eugene, Oregon and wiped it out. Because I have it installed up there, it's going to be installed on other availability zones up there also, so I don't have to worry about a single point of failure again. Remember, that was one of our topics, is that we are trying to avoid single points of failure. So you can actually install stuff across availability zones within a region. So
I mean, that is a choice, right? I mean,
yeah,
you have to choose to do more than one.
correct.
I mean,
Yes.
if you only do one and it gets hit, that's on you, right?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So good point. Yeah. It's not. It won't automatically do that. But the one thing nice about being in the same region is that they're all in the same network, so that your ability to do stuff there becomes a little easier than trying to copy it from one region to the other one. And that's a good question. I need to double check that, because I think.
I mean, they
said
just
is right.
suggest you for your own security to have it in at least 2 locations, right?
Right. And we'll double check that.
Okay.
Because I was trying to think why I wouldn't do it in 2 different regions compared to 2 different availability zones. I know there's some reasons.
Oh, I'm not. I meant availability zones. I'm sorry. Like,
No,
you would
right.
probably choose 2 or more availability zones in the region. But yes, I mean, but the way I've heard it is, it's a choice whether you want to do that. But that's just smart to, just in case something happens.
No, I 100. Yeah, your way you asked the question was the right way to ask it.
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out, would there be a benefit to doing it 2 availability zones in one region or in 2 different regions? And that's the question I guess I have to figure out, is that why would I install it in 2 zones in one region or in 2 different regions? And I'll Google that before we're done today. I'll go take a look at it.
Well, most companies probably would shop around regions, and then they probably grab 2 availability zones in that region, right? Or maybe more. Yeah.
Well, I mean, each time I have a different installation. So let's say I create a virtual in region 1 and I install it on 2 different availability zones within that region. I actually have 2 instances created, and they're billed as 2 instances. Now, I don't know. Let me table that for a second, or for a minute or two. We might come back and look at that one, because I do want to. Before I say something wrong, I just want to make sure. I think what you said is right, but I just want to double check that. So
okay.
So the other term you need to know is edge locations. Edge locations are the ones that are closest to the user. So when you get on your computer and you connect to a service, the one you connect to is an edge. Now, when I say edge, it's the point of contact closest to you. So if I'm running my business out of Palo Alto, California, I might have edge computers that are way out, like in the middle of nowhere, that allows people to connect. And that's going to improve those latency, reduce the latency. So just because I'm based in Palo Alto, California, doesn't mean I'm going to run everything from there. It's back about being out closest to where the users are connected. So edge, just think of edge is your network, all the edge pieces where the users are going to engage your application, your website, or whatever you're going to do. So that you need to know. CloudFronts are cached copies. So when you run a CloudFront, this is actually one of the AWS services, they will actually run copies of content that's requested a lot and put it where it's requested or needed. So let's say today, the Packers beat the Bears. There's a picture of Aaron Rodgers that I have on my website. And for some reason, that picture is being accessed by more than any other thing on my website. It's going to make a copy of that and put it out there so that people can get to it, not have to come back to my website or to my full website. Because they're there and they're just going to refresh the picture. So these cached copies, you don't, as a person, have to say you want to cache the copies. CloudFront, the service, will determine what things are needed and where they're needed, and will make copies as needed. Now, a copy's static. It won't automatically make it dynamic. So, if I'm typing in a mortgage calculator, I'm typing my down payment is $400,000 or whatever it's going to be. Even though everybody's requesting that mortgage calculator, it's not going to cache the 400,000 piece of it, because the calculator is different for every single person. So the cache thing is static content. It's not something that's generated dynamically. It's not something that changes every second or even every minute. It's something that's is there, and it just makes sense to copy it so that you're not having people come all the way across the internet to get the important piece of content. So CloudFront, that's something you're going to need to know. CloudFront stores cached copies, not dynamic, and it puts it where the users are requesting it. So it's putting on the servers closest to them to reduce that latency. Okay, so I'm going to jump off for a second because I want to check this regions and availability zone. So I'm going to do a quick Google search here. Pull this across. Make this small here. So let's see here. Let's see, regions versus availability zones, AWS. So availability zones are multiple isolated locations within each region. Local zones provide a place to compute. AWS Outpost brings AWS services, wavelength. Although rare failures can occur that affect availability of instances that are in the same location. If you host all your instances in a single location that's affected by failure, none of your, so yes, you have to make this determination, exactly what you said, to put it in the other availability zone. So that's exactly what this is saying right here. So although it's rare, I mean, the data centers are pretty robust and plenty of backup power and everything else that goes along with it. But if something physically destroys it, you have to host all your instances. You would have to make the decision that you want to host your instances on other availability centers.
So they conveniently suggest you double your output so they can double their business, right?
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah, you think you're about right. Yeah. There's multiple regions so you can launch instances to meet your requirement. For example, you want to launch instances. That's regions. Provides access. Oh, there are.
But if you think about it, I mean, if the hardware is there, the data centers are their responsibility. If it get knocked out, I mean, yeah, it slows down your business, but I don't know. Yeah, I get it. Never mind.
Yeah, I think what you probably would have to do is make a hot, be ready to spin up an extra instance in another region so you're not paying for it. So one thing you can do is you can make snapshots of what you created in one region or one availability zone and make it available on the cloud. So if something happens to that region, you just go ahead and spin it up in another availability zone and you're up and running within a couple seconds or at least a couple minutes and you're good to go. This you need to know, there are a couple of private clouds out there. They're usually government related. You do not have access to those as an individual. That was on a practice test I questioned, saying what's special about AWS clouds, and basically you don't have access to them. They're government cloud services. So, okay. And here is all, oh, what's this about opt-in stuff? You can't describe additional, such as AWS, to use regional introduction. You must enable the region. Oh, I think it's just saying these are ones you have access to by default. So you would have to opt in to get Africa to show up. But these are the 4 regions that the US has one in Ohio, one in Virginia, one in California, Northern California, one in Oregon. So nothing in this like Texas area, which is kind of interesting. And those are the other ones. Notice that they have these numbers after it. So this becomes your region, and you'll see letters that show up after this. This becomes your availability zone. So when we went back and looked at, where was that one here? This is your availability zone A, and there's multiple availability zones. So we'll dissect a couple more of those. But yeah, so good question on that piece of it. Thanks for asking that. So now we answered that one. So you can install it in any availability zone within a region, but you have to physically, you have to choose, make a conscious effort to say, I want to install it on multiple availability zones. Okay, so share responsibility. I'm going to skip this one and go to this one. So this is something else. I know there's a lot of information here, but if I was going to build my own data center, if I was going to run my own data center, I would be responsible for the code, the security, the database, the operating system, the virtualization, networking, storage hardware, and server hardware. As I move towards this one, a pure cloud, if I went to a pure cloud environment, they're going to manage all of these aspects. AWS, for the most part, runs as this one, an infrastructure as a service. We, as the client, are responsible for writing our own application code, building our own websites, building our own APIs, installing our own databases, setting up our own security, and installing our own operating systems. So they will manage the server hardware, the storage hardware, they will plug the networks in, they will create the virtualization. But I have to spin up that EC2 instance or that Elastic Beanstalk instance and tell them what type of operating system I want. I want a Linux, I want a Kali, I want a Debian, whatever it's going to be. I pick this, and that from that point on, I manage it. If I need to patch the operating system, I'm responsible for it. If I want to install the database, I'm responsible for it. If I want to set up the securities of who can access this, I'm responsible, and I actually do the application code. There are tools within Amazon that will allow us to say, I want Amazon to create the database. I want Amazon to do the security, or I want Amazon to build the application code. But from what we need to know from our environment, this is probably going to be most of your answers. AWS is running as an infrastructure as a service. They're managing the hardware, the network, and the virtualization on a piece of hardware. You are doing everything that's software related. You're installing the operating system, the database, the setup security, and building the application code. So this chart is something you probably want to learn. They're going to ask you the benefits. They're going to say, if I'm running a software as a service, who manages the application code? Or if I'm running a platform as a service, who manages the networking? So if you can just get used to this piece of it, actually platform as a service and software as a service have the same thing. I'm not sure there's this one, maybe I got that one wrong. No, I think I have that right. I'll double check that one. The application as a code might be platform as a service for that piece of it. So does that make sense in terms of like the, where cloud benefits you? All this physical stuff is managed by AWS.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Managed under AWS. So this is relational database services. In this case, AWS would manage my MySQL installation. I am not installing MySQL myself. I'm running an RDS, which says, Amazon, I want you to spin up my MySQL, and I want you to manage my MySQL. So this goes back to, we're probably now at a platform as a service for my databases if I use the Amazon RDS. If I'm going to install my own MySQL, I'm over in this environment, which I'm probably installing MySQL on an EC2 instance. Almost all of the underlying components for this stuff is in EC2. Think of it as a virtual system. If I'm going to do an Elastic Beanstalk or Elastic Container, they're spinning up EC2 instances to manage that request. So when I say I want a MySQL database, it's going to create an EC2 instance and install that MySQL database on it. So I'm paying for the EC2 instance, and I'll pay a little bit extra for them to manage the database platform on there in addition to it. Same thing with Elastic Beanstalk. If I want them to create an environment for me, they'll spin up EC2 and anything else I need to make that work. The unmanaged one is all the underlying EC2. So if I want to create my Elastic Container 2 box and install my own MySQL, it's not managed under AWS. The benefits for managing it myself is I have complete control over the environment. I can set up all the different parameters. If I let AWS manage it, because they have to manage thousands or millions of these, they only are giving you a subset of the things that you can configure yourself. So they're making it a little easier for you to do, but they take away some of the tools that you might need to manage it exactly the way you want to. So that's where you install your own MySQL and make it unmanaged out of it. So anyway, that's there. Oh, you also need to understand the AWS acceptable user policy, which is what can you and what can you not do using their platform. So like, obviously you can't run gambling services, you can't run illegal activities, you can't run denial of service attacks or anything like that. So you want to at least become familiar with the AWS acceptable user policies. Most of it is common sense. Every practice, most of the practice tests I took, I mean, I think I probably knew the answers without actually having to go to look. I can't think of any that would have been like, oh, really? You can't do that? Or, oh, you can do that. So, and there's a link down there to go into that one. Okay. So what do you need to know about billing and pricing? This was from last week. or 2 weeks ago. We covered some of this stuff. I just kind of wanted to re-hit some of these things. You need to understand and contrast the various pricing models for AWS, whether you're paying for the server, the CPU, the operating system you're installing on it, or are you paying for the network traffic that goes back and forth? So are you paying for that virtual environment, or are you paying for network? Are you paying specifically for storage, like on an S3? So you want to know the different pricing models that come along with it. And account structures, you want to know whether I'm a client, education. There's a couple different account structures that come along with it. We talked about these explorers that we actually demoed them. So if you want to go back and watch those, the cost explorer, the total cost of ownership calculator, the simple monthly calculator. So none of them are going to ask you to calculate anything, but they're going to ask you what you would see. So if I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to have one server running, I can do a simple monthly calculator and say, I'm going to run this for 17 hours a day for 30 days. It would tell me it. But if I want to know total ownership, I'm going to spin up these instances. I'm going to put CloudFront. I'm going to put all these pieces together. That would be a different type of calculation. And Cost Explorer just sees to see where your money is being spent. If I want to know where my $1,000 a month is, I can look at Cost Explorer and go, okay, well, I got $400 for my databases. I've got $250 for my edge computing or for my S5 or sorry, S3 storage space. I've got another $400 for EC2 instances, and I got a Glacier one. So Cost Explorer is what do I have? Total cost ownership is what it's cost me to run all of my different environments if I wanted to. And simple monthly calculator say I want to spin some stuff up. What's it going to cost with it, the various pieces of it? So yeah, so this actually goes to compare and contrast the pricing model. So compute, what's the CPU? What's the RAM I'm using? Storage, how much space am I storing? Am I storing, do I need 5 gigabytes or 20 gigabytes? And data out, how much data is being transferred back and forth? So from an API call, there's very little compute and very little storage. So it's the data. How many requests am I going to make to my API part of it? Compute is I'm running at 50% CPU on a Linux machine or on a Windows. Windows machines are more expensive than Linux machines. So you need to understand these are your 3 types of charges that you can get billed for the various pieces of it. The more data you transfer, the less you pay. So, you think that if I'm going to transfer a bunch, but they actually have a law of diminishing returns. So if I get to the point where I'm actually creating either a bunch of services, I can prepay for those services. It'll save me money. So if I have one server, I might pay, let's say $50. But if I have 5 servers, instead of paying $250, I might only pay $200. And if I had 5,000 servers, instead of paying 25,000 or whatever it would be, I might only pay 18,000. So there is I don't want to say incentives, but there is the concept of the more you need, the cheaper it becomes. You're going to pay more. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Amazon's making money, but the more power, the more things you use from them, the cheaper some of that stuff gets because they know they're going to make it up. For them to have a server with a virtual on there, it costs like pennies. So they're making a boatload on that one server, and they're going to make money whether you have 5,000 servers too. So, they're not being generous. They're just being realistic. They're trying to encourage you. So that actually might go along with the, the different availability zones. If I buy one server in one availability zone, that's 50. And if I buy 2 at 2 different availability zones, it might be 45 or $45 each. So I might save money across it, but I'm still paying that for that second, both servers, $45. So I'm paying $90 instead of 50. But now I have that high availability, and I've reduced my redundancy or reduced my single points of contact. Single point or consolidated billing. There on the last practice test I took, there were 4 questions on consolidated billing as being one of the benefits of why you would use a cloud service provider. Because all your stuff comes in, you've got one place to see how much am I using for compute, how much am I using for storage, where's my security aspects, how many different MySQL services are coming up with it. So you can get different divisions or different divisions or different geographies. So let's say I'm running a global operation. Europe can run their own environment, and the US can run their own environment, and Asia can run all theirs. But as a company, I can bring all those consolidated bills into one. And because I'm using more servers, you see volume pricing discounts. I now say, okay, instead of using 10 or using 1,000 services, I've got 10,000. Well, because I'm using 10,000, everything becomes cheaper. So this consolidated billing becomes a great way to control your costs, to manage your costs and understand your costs and reduce your costs because of the volume pricing discounts that come along with having all these different services running across a bunch of different things. So I know I went through that kind of quick. We're about 15 minutes left. I do have some practice questions we can look at, but any questions about stuff on this? And I'll post the video and the slides after we're done.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask about the slides, because like what the client's responsible for and what they're responsible for slide is, I'd be like, oh crap, well,
Yeah,
which one is it?
that one's
that
gonna be
one.
the-
Yeah, I'll be like, damn it.
Yeah. So when they talk about on premises, that's a client running their own data service or their own servers on their own networks. That's the way most companies used to offer. It's only when cloud started coming up that you start seeing these other things pop up with it. And a lot of tools you buy, a lot of tools companies buy are now run as software as a service, where you don't have to manage anything. You just manage the interaction, the data that goes in and out of here. Actually, they should have had data at the top of all of these, because you're, as a client, you're always responsible for the data, the user interaction, the stuff that's being stored on your different platforms. I mean, software as a service is not going to collect data from the user. They're relying on the client to collect that piece of it. Okay, so let's do a couple of these practice questions. So which of the following designations would refer to the US West Oregon region?
That would be C, right?
Just be B, because the A or C includes the availability zone.
Yeah, wow, good job. That's that. I got that one wrong. So yes, so obviously West gets rid of this one. That's East. And just this is one of the things by just being familiar, you got to be in there a little bit. So it's US dash the region and then dash a number. So this one's ruled out because you don't have that. And exactly what Chris said is that this A is the availability zone. So if we're just talking regions, then US West dash 2. And these are the kind of questions that are going to trip you up. I mean, you look at this, you're like, oh, this is almost all of them have a letter after them. So I'm going to assume that that's a region, but no, that's the availability zone part of it. And this was a question that popped up, I think, last weekend. They don't give you, like, if there's 4 availability zones in US West, the first drop down is not always A, B, C, D. It's sometimes A, sometimes B. They randomize which availability zone is the default for your installation. And they do that because everybody would pick A. They always pick the first item in the dropdown.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't change it. So just know that if one of the questions pops up, say, what is the order of the availability zones in a region when you spin up a service? It is random. There's no preconceived notion on that. So that was brand new to me. I had never heard that, but that was one of those weird questions that popped up. I'm sure in one of the readings somewhere, it probably talks about that, but that one I got wrong. So I'm averaging about a 70% on my practice test. So I think I'm doing pretty good, and we'll actually do full practice tests here probably in a couple of weeks. I don't know if we'll do full one, but we'll start doing like big.
You had to pay for the practice test, right?
So I've got a couple free ones. I'm going to pay for them. So I'll share those free ones with you. I think I got to pay $20 to get like 4 practice tests, but I bought a book that has 2 practice tests. There's a website, which I think I can send you, that gives me 1 free practice test. So there's a couple places you can get them. I would encourage you to take them too early because what will happen is you'll read the question, you'll get the answer right, and then you can't go back later on to check it on it. So but we're doing a couple of questions here. I mean, if that's the way you learn, if you learn by taking a test and then going to read why the question's right or wrong, that's one way. But then if you run out of free practice tests before you feel comfortable, then you're kind of stuck on, okay, well, now what do I do? So I think you can keep paying for more if you want to. I'll have to figure that part out. So, but I like try to do at least five of these questions each class, because I think, one, it gets us talking about it, but also we can talk about why the trip up. Like this one's, if you read this, okay, I know that one doesn't exist. And if you're smart enough that there's always a number there, 2 are gone. So now you just have to narrow it down to 2. And this is just, you got to reread the question. Okay, which is the region, not availability zone? So that would get rid of C. So a lot of this is like process of elimination to get down to the right one. So let's try this one here.
So US West 1 would be like California then, right?
US West 1, I think, is Northern California. Yeah, there was
Okay.
actually, yeah.
Because there's only 2 zones, right, in the West.
Yeah, there's Oregon and Northern California, and there's 2 in the East, 1 in Ohio and 1 in Virginia. And I don't know which is which. I don't know, like, I think 1 is Virginia and East, 2 is in Ohio, and 2 is Oregon, and I think West is Northern California. So, and I've never seen a question asked that, like, where are they located? I've seen them only like this, where they ask about what does it mean? What is this defined?
Okay.
I think I have another question up here that's going to just going to break it down a little further. Okay, so when requesting a new instance, which setting automatically determines where the instance will be created? Which setting automatically determines where the instance will be created? So, so EC2, okay, so that's just a normal spin up one. And we got to figure out automatically. So service realm, we didn't talk about, so we don't know anything about that. Subnet is an address, an IP address, which is nothing about where things are going to be created. Now, availability zone could be, and region could be, but we need to read this again. And so which one's automatically is determined. So if I pick which region I'm going to install it with, it doesn't automatically pick which availability zone. It's going to pick, when I pick region 1, it's going to randomly assign one of these availability zones. So this is a little confusing how to read this one, but the piece that's going to do, so the EC2 instance where it's going to be created is based on your region. That's going to automatically pick your availability zone. I'm just going to randomly pick your availability zone. So this is the answer, D. And I probably didn't explain that the way it needed to be, but availability zone, you pick. It's not automatically done for you. So, and you'll actually, we could probably hop on, maybe if we have time, we'll hop on and show you how that region part automatically picks it up. But these two, we didn't talk about service realm. This is where, if you don't know what it is, just kind of put that off to the side. Subnet we know is an address, so that has nothing to determine automatic part of it. So it was really between these two, with this one being a question mark. And I think I got this one right because I remember reading that availability is something you have to pick. You have to pick which availability zone you want to go into. But the region part, when I say EC or US West 1, that's going to automatically create in that environment, which is not a global service. So these are, we talked about global footprints, where I have to install something on a physical server and tell it where to install it. And some of these I install one place and it puts it anywhere, anywhere that it is needed, it's used. So I have to, this one's obvious because I have to tell it where I want to create my EC2 instances. That's just one that we spend most of the time with. I need to tell it I want to create an EC2 instance in US West and in East. Route 53 is a global DNS service. A global DNS service allows me to type in eBay, and then it figures out the IP address, and through the IP address figures out where it needs to go. Well, DNS is global. I can be in China and type in gcu.edu, and it's going to find that service wherever it needs to be. So Route 53 needs to be a global service. So which of these is not a global service? So that one is a global service. CloudFront, we already talked about. That's the one that caches it, puts it where it needs to go. So that needs to be a global service.
That needs to be global, yeah.
Right. So then we kind of go, okay, we know this one is because we've been playing with it. We're pretty sure we know this one isn't. So if you didn't know what either one of these is, you'd have to guess which other one. So I get one right here. I know this one's not, so I'm down to 2. But knowing that Route 53 is a DNS service, DNS is always global. So that would be a global one. So your answers here would be A and C for that instance for it. Notice that this one does say select 2. Make sure you know if it's going to ask for 2 answers, because if you check 1, even if you got the right one, you're not going to get half points. It's all or nothing. Excuse me. Okay, let's see if you guys can get this one right out since we talked enough about this, but which endpoint would be valid for a developer to action a relational database service in Northern Virginia? So is this one right? Could this one be right?
East, relational
Extension going to be
database.
RDS, you're thinking? It would have to be a .com, right?
Yeah,
It would probably
Yep.
be C.
I was thinking C also.
Yeah, so actually good catch. So we can start crossing stuff off. So yes, everything is going to end with Amazon AWS.com. So we know immediately A and D are not the right answers. Now, we don't necessarily know. If you don't know what a relational database service, that's that RDS. It's not an EC2 instance. So, okay, these are both the same, but this one's RDS and this is EC2. So we're pretty sure that we're going to spin up on an RDS US East 1. Now, did I know that Northern Virginia was East 1? No, but the good news is they're all East 1. So I didn't need to know Northern Virginia. If they would have said Oregon, then obviously none of these would be right because it's US West for an Oregon. So you have to know some geography, but you don't need to be a geography bee to understand 100% of it. So
they don't have questions like that, do they?
this is from a real practice test question. Yeah.
No, I mean like a question that's like none of the answers are right.
If they did, they would make one of the options that would say none of the questions above like that.
Oh man.
No, sorry.
Really
No, but I could say, I could have them do this where it says, which of these would be in Northern Virginia? And two of these would be West 1 and two of these would be East 1. And you have to go, okay, Northern Virginia is in the East, not in the West. So there is like in some geography that comes along with it, but they're telling you Virginia. So, which is interesting now that I think about it, because this is a global exam. So how would somebody like in Europe know Northern Virginia is US East?
Yeah.
Hopefully they don't give us like Europe East and West and try to figure
I was
out
gonna say
country.
Like Budapest or something.
Yeah, and I think they would probably give you this, where they would give you all the same region, and you've got to figure out the rest. Like that, the first part of this is going to be the service EC2 RDS. It doesn't just start with the region. So these two both start with it, but then you also know Amazon AWS.com. You don't end randomly with a US East down here. So, you guys did a good job understanding. That .com. So we narrowed it down to these two. Okay, practice test 5. What is the primary goal of auto scaling? So auto scaling is that you're allowing more and more services to take up bandwidth as it comes in, and it also scales back down as needed. So which do you think's the right answer in this case?
I don't know. I like A.
I'm thinking D, like
orchestrated
in parallel.
Yeah, so let's talk about this one. So to ensure long-term, we'll skip the first one here. To ensure long-term reliability of physical resource. Okay, since we don't control physical resources, we're in a cloud environment, we know that one's immediately out. Right. To ensure the long-term reliability of a virtual resource, well, if it's one resource, there's no scaling. I mean, it may keep my virtual instance up and running, but it's not going to allow the scaling. So it's going to be now either A or D. To orchestrate where user requests are sent in a parallel computing to ensure predefined service levels maintained regardless of demand or instance failure. So this one, auto scaling does not necessarily control where the users go, because let's say it auto scales up and I have 5 virtual services. Auto scaling doesn't say which it goes to. That's part of the load balancing that says which one's being set up. Yeah. So it's auto scaling is not saying where the user goes, but it is used to maintain a service level. So if I want people to access my application and there's more and more people coming in, all of a sudden my service level is going down because it's starting to slow down. So it's going to auto scale up to meet demand. Or if that machine happens to fail, that physical machine fails and I have auto scaling turned on, it'll create another instance and allow me to move into that environment. So auto scaling, think of it as it has nothing to do with users. It has nothing to do with hardware, and it doesn't control your virtual environments for just that long term. It's short. Actually, that's the other thing. So auto scaling is short term. It meets the demand and it goes back down. Anything that has long term has nothing to do with auto scaling, because auto scaling could be run by the second. Create an instance. I need it for a second. Create it for 5 minutes. Create it for an hour. Create it for Black Friday shopping, but then bring it back down. It's not a long term. It's not going to keep that services running for days and weeks and years. If it's going longer than like maybe a couple days, I might need to look at my service level to get to this top one here and actually have a larger minimum size so that I can meet it rather than have to keep scaling up. Because I don't know if the cost of scaling goes up. That's another question I don't know. I haven't seen it come up on the questions. Like if it auto scales up and it stays up there for a year, is that more expensive than me just going ahead and sizing it? Probably, because if you know your size, you can pay based on your expected size and reduce your cost. But
if you're choosing auto scale all the time, that's more a responsibility for AWS to handle. So I would assume it'd be a little more expensive to keep it on consistently,
Yeah, and I think, okay, so we go back to that thing we talked about, having 5 servers are cheaper than running one server. Well, if I'm paying for one server and all the rest are being billed at that single server price, it's going to be more expensive than me running 5 servers at a lower cost for the full year. So I think there is some that's some of the budgeting aspect that goes along with it. That would probably one of those TLC calculators that we'd have to run to figure that part out of it. So, but anyway, so next week we're going to go, I always have these in the back of it. We talked about those earlier, but next week we are going to get into, where to go, security and compliance, which is, making sure people get access and authenticate, difference between authorization and authentication. And then the next 2 weeks we'll do technology. And then I think what we might do is we might do a practice test after next week. So we'll do the full regular lecture next week. And the one after that, I'll probably have as many questions as we can fit in an hour and start going through them and see where we're right or wrong. But I won't give you the answer. We'll kind of like have you guys, maybe, I don't know, we'll just take a poll or something. Yeah, we'll work through it. Yeah. To see where we need some more work. The fact we won't have covered technology will be a big gap in that. But some of it I think you're going to know just from being tech savvy, maybe not from, being in there all the time, but I would encourage you to get in there and play around with a couple of the services, read some of this stuff back here before we get into those tests. And I think you'll feel a lot more comfortable with what you're doing. This site was actually pretty interesting. This Jefferson Frank, I don't know if I can get to it here.
Can I access this on the Slack channel somewhere?
I'm gonna actually put it. It'll go.
Is it under the Grand University one?
It's the GCU certs. This workspace, and there's an AWS channel. And Chris, I don't know if you're in here.
Can I add it somehow?
The channel or the whole workspace?
Just the AWS.
If you go to channels, I think I can actually.
Can't you send them like an invite or something?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if I can. I'm not sure how I do that. If you click channels up here,
I browse it or?
Well, yeah, click browse,
Okay.
and then you should see AWS pop there. You can go ahead and just join it then.
The 7 members one?
Yep, that one. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'll post the slides there in the video. Might not be first thing.
Okay.
Might be first thing in the morning. But this site right here, this Jefferson Frank, has a lot of good information here. It talks about stuff. They got a. Here's what's in the practitioner guide. They talk about domains, what you need to know for each of the domains. So I would encourage you, make sure you scroll down. It looks like it ends, like right there, it looks like you're at the end. Mm-hmm. But if you scroll down further, there's domain 2, there's domain 3, and there's domain 4. So all that stuff's there. And here's your support plans, your basic, your developer, your costs, and final thoughts. So that one's a good one, I think, just to kind of get yourself familiar with a lot of this stuff. But then there's obviously the AWS things. These white papers, there's going to be questions that come across these white papers too. So,
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so you don't have your test scheduled yet, but you're shooting for early November?
Yeah, I've got some things going on I got to take care of. So I don't want to set an exact date because I might need the middle of November, but I do want to get it passed. So if I get certified to teach, if I pass my test, I've got to take another small test. It's really easy from what I understand to become certified to teach it starting January 1st. And then once I get my associates in any one of the fields, I can teach anything on that schedule. So my goal for that would be like June to get that piece done. But we'll see how the first one goes. I don't want to get my hopes up and fail this one because I'm going to feel like an idiot. So, but I've heard enough people. You can go read online, and people say, "Oh, I bought a book. I read it over the weekend. I passed it on Monday." Or I watched these series of videos. They went to YouTube, watched some free videos on passing the practitioner test. Amazon wants you to pass the practitioner test because then you get excited about passing their other tests. So they're purposely not making it hard to pass it, which is good for us because we don't want a hard test. We want to go in there and ace it and move on with the next one. But it's funny because companies look at it as like this gold standard. If you get it added, going, oh, this person understands cloud. And they don't think it's just AWS cloud. They think it's Azure cloud and Google cloud and Oracle cloud. Because what AWS is teaching you for cloud practitioner is not necessarily specifically AWS products, although they do, but they're teaching you the availability, the elasticity, the redundancy, the single point of failure, the metered cost, all those foundational things. That's why it's cloud, the foundational, learning, because it's cloud everywhere. It's not just AWS.
It's just recruiting a lot of people with a sales pitch to drive their business.
Right. It is. It does. And once you become, when you go work for a company, like, well, I'm AWS Cloud Practitioner certified, and you're going to go tell your boss, hey, we need to be using AWS. And yes, it's definitely a marketing ploy. They're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're trying to build a community of people that want to use AWS, and they make your first certification easy. The other ones can become a lot harder. The professional architect, I think has a 45% pass rate. So some of those become a little more difficult, obviously, with it. But let's get through the first one, and then we can go on from there. So
okay, thank you.